Hi everyone, welcome to week 8. So today we're going to be talking about framing and in particular media framing and LGBTQ discourses. And as I told you, there's several readings that talk specifically about the framing of LGBTQ plus discourses. So sort of like the specifics of those discourses can be found in there when it comes to media framing. So I'm going to really focus on the sort of a general overview of these discourses, and especially the idea of frames and framing, and using the idea of media, not just news media, but in this case, I'm going to talk a little bit about broader media outlets. For instance, I'm going to be using some film examples, but at the end, we'll discuss a specific issue around LGBTQ discourses around Singapore and the governmental framing. So it's not just when we think about media and framing, it's just not only news outlets. So keep a sort of a broader spectrum because this framing affects everything. So let's then focus on the connection between week 7 and week 8. So remember how last week we were talking about how really through feminist theory we can unpack a lot of different ways that power works, and not just in this sort of top-down or bottom-up traditional approach to power, which in the end is the idea of power as domination, right? So power as a much more organically invisible force. And a good way to think about that was the way Sarah Hartnett put it when she was saying that really feminist theory is thinking about who is in the of thinking really of putting back the who into politics, right? When she and I quote her here when she said that power works by presuming the interest of one group is in the interest of all groups by having that interest in the interest of that one group, right? So the idea of challenging political universalism is locating that power beyond the traditional top-down, bottom-up. So really the idea of framing and reframing when it comes to media, remember that I'm talking here about media in a general way, so not just media as a medium, so as a medium of communication, so not simply news outlet. Remember that it goes from film to television to different type of popular culture through newspaper clips, all government speeches, celebrities, all this type of stuff. So media in general. Right. So the idea of framing and reframing is also about locating, right? We're going to be looking at framing and reframing and the connection with this other concept of reification. And how, and through these two concepts, we're going to see different ways of locating power. So how power is reframed is another way of locating power beyond the visible. And ways of acquiring powers through framing and reframing, or really not so much acquiring, but at least giving different social groups the possibility, the access to acquire power in the future. And this is an important definition, an important difference that you need to keep in mind. That the fact that you are framing or reframing an issue doesn't mean that there is any type of progress necessarily around the issue. It simply means that there is an access to changing power dynamics, or simply you're unveiling a certain type of power dynamic. All right, so let's get into it and let's talk about framing theory. Right, so when we think really framing theory, I don't want to obscure it too much when theorizing the idea of framing. I want to try to keep it as simple as possible, because it's one of these very sort of simple, or in the face of it, it is a simple operation, theoretical operation. But it takes some time to actually being able to use it properly. So this is really in the practice. So in the practice, you realize that and knowing how something is framed, it's more difficult than it seems at first, right? And really framing theory of frames, the frames, it's simply when information is selected in a way to influence people on how to think, and here I really stress the idea of how to think, not on what to think, but on how to think about an issue. And it's really important, this distinction. And really, the devil here is in the details. So what to think, that is not framing, that is propaganda, right? And there's sort of like explicit way. Propaganda, I'm using again propaganda from a political science perspective. It's not just kind of North Korean type of style propaganda. Propaganda is simply when government policy is communicated through governmental channels. That is really propaganda. Really, the Ministry of Information today, back in the 60s and 70s, was called the Ministry of Propaganda, And so I'm not using the word here terminology with any negative issues, right? So, but just pay attention to the difference between framing and propaganda in the way I'm using it. So framing is to influence selecting pieces of information in order to create a message to influence how people think about that issue, right? In this sense, frames organize our everyday, like in the poll article was stated. Now, and this is important, the key part in here, framing to be effective needs to be implicit. Again, as opposed to what to think, how to think. It's an implicit process of communication. It's really best used when it's underneath the surface, when it's invisible, when you simply accept the framing, you don't question the framing, because it passes as just common sense, basically. And this also has to do something with implicit bias theory when it comes to communication. It's related, so you can actually explore that bit of information through there. But framing is at the core of implicit bias theory, right? It's at the core. That's how different biases are passed as common sense, right? And when it comes to journalism, and here we're talking about, because the piece really, the Pulse articles talks about journalism, media in the LGBTQ plus issues, right? This idea is that the idea that frames have reproduced in order to resonate with the current culture, right, in which they operate. So also pay attention that media of these frames are not simply just shaping what people think. They need to resonate, and it's going to be really important that you analyze both ends of the spectrum, not just think, oh, this journalist, this media piece is shaping people's opinions. No, not so much. It's way more subtle. So these media frames or framing, really, it is inserted with a certain culture, with something. It's already there for opinion to be shaped. Something already needs to be there in the first place. So this frame is not just like convincing people that they should think something else, right? It's not what to think, it's how to think about it, which is a subtle differentiation, but really important, right? And then just I'll give you here an example about how if you look at how different LGBTQ plus issues are being represented throughout history, then you can start looking at how these different discourses were framed differently, right? And how, in fact, when we look at this, the representation, when I'm using queer here as non-normative, really, it's kind of like from queer theory to as a non-normative identity. How it evolved in tension, and here again, the importance of this word, I kind of really stress it enough, in tension with political struggles. It's not that it don't go, sometimes, a lot of times it's just, they're not aligned. There is a representation that is acceptable, then there's a political struggle, and the representation moves even within the community that is fighting for the political recognition, right? So just look at, for instance, at that article. Not only in the article that we talk about framing Brokeback Mountain, but especially the first one, Diversity on Display, framing the gay perspective in radio program, and you can see how these discourses in the radio program today just seem unacceptable. Yeah, but political struggle, and they were in tension with a lot of political activists around LGBTQ plus issues. So these two things are not usually aligned, but intentions. And framing helps to reestablish that identity, and is the result of a political struggle. Yeah, so I want you to really pay attention to these things, right? Don't think that just because you reframe something, then you can have some type of political gain. I will be repeating this later on. Yeah. So now we go from framing to reification. So framing is the beginning, right? The idea of reification comes afterwards. Framing has been successful. And these things are not set in stone. So just because something is being reified doesn't mean that it's going to stay there forever. It's not established. It's simply reified. Reified simply means that an abstract concept, and these things are just for abstract also. We're talking about values, so it's not just in a specific issue. So reification really speaks to the abstract idea that is behind a specific issue in the frame, right? And we're going to be talking, for instance, about gay marriage later on, as the abstract idea is equality, right, around gay marriage. And the gay community needs to have equality, and that was reified around gay marriage, right? But there's also other mechanisms of reification. Let me re-explain or get a little bit more into what reification really means, right? So reification is the abstract concept that is behind the frame, that eventually, because the frame and the framing has been successful, pass as natural, as common sense, as belonging to the realm of everyday life, right? So reification is the consequence of successful framing, right? For instance, I'll give you this example around universal morals, right? There is different discourses that you can see today around how certain moralities are simply universal to all human beings. But remember what Sarah Ahmed was saying about challenging political universals, right? When you actually look at the historical evolution of these so-called universal values, in the end, what you have are a very specific set of values that have been reified, set of values that were framed as universal successfully, then were reified in certain culture as universal, and they stay as universal. So we think about the Judeo-Christian traditions in Australia to justify assimilation of immigrants, right? That is a certain type of reification. And that, again, don't think reification doesn't mean that everybody agrees with it. It's just that it's taken for granted, that it's not questioned. When you say that, someone can, and when you have a government saying that, it is because there is a large part of the population that simply accepts it, don't question it, not only just agrees with it, it just simply understood that Australia has in its core Judeo-Christian values, plus other things, right? But has it. Whether that's true or not, it's really beyond the point. The point is that simply is not questioned, right? The same thing goes to this. It's not an issue of the left or the right. It's really an all-around issue when it comes to framing political issues or cultural issues. In France, the idea of secular republican values, for instance, that ban the veil in schools, in basically governmental public places. That's another way in which the republic and secularism was reified in France, right? Yeah, the traditional family is another one, but I need to move on. But I want you to pay attention to this, because reification doesn't mean that everybody agrees with it. It's just that it's taken for granted that it's part of it, and then you might want to add on other things. For instance, in the case of Australia, you want to say it's not only Judeo-Christian, but in no way you will actually challenge successfully. Successfully is the key word here, that Australia doesn't have Judeo-Christian values and only has, for instance, indigenous values or multicultural values. It has Judeo-Christian values plus with it. Yeah. The multicultural reification of Australia is, for instance, another really interesting debate. Yeah. Okay, so look at how framing goes into reification, and reification is this process that makes abstract ideas, abstract concepts pass as natural as common sense. Yeah. In that sense, and this from in Yancey articles, it allows for recodification of culture. It attempts at making some principles of that around a cultural code to make them, it allows for those codes to be static. That doesn't mean they are static. It allows for those codes to be static, and that way you can recodify culture. What is, again, with the idea of authenticity here, for instance, was authentic or was not authentic. That comes about through reification. And here around African tradition, what is traditionally African, and how that actually came about through colonization, how British colonization invented African traditions for Africans. And in that way, the idea of what is traditional in Africa came to be recodified as a static traditional African culture, right? And that then shapes modern behaviors and other behaviors around what is and what is not acceptable in different parts of Africa through this idea of African tradition that comes from the colony, right? So in the end, the very ultimate change in part of this change is a recodification of culture. So then you have framing, reframing, then you have reification, and in the end, you have the recodification of culture in order to make those codes static. While culture is absolutely dynamic, there's this tension, and there's this tension in which they try that through this process of framing reification, you try to stop on its tracks the fluidity of culture and make certain principles, certain ideas static, not movable, as the idea of authenticity. Think about the idea of authenticity is a very static concept. For something to be authentic, cannot move, has to stay. If it's fluid, if it's changing, then authenticity sort of dissolves. Yeah, you have to have customs and that type of stuff in order for something to be authentic and to be there to be fixed. Okay. A good example of this, and I want to talk about this because I want to think about the human rights sphere when it comes to LGBTQ plus discourses, and how the West is being touted kind of the refuge for victims of human rights abuses, especially when it comes to the LGBTQ plus discourse, right? You know, Europe is the birthplace of human rights. The West in general, and again, I have a lot of problems with the whole idea of the West, but just so we all understand each other, is the place of modernity. Immigrants come to this paradise of human rights, escaping these kind of cruel, backward societies in which human rights are constantly violated. This framing of non-Western countries as places of cruelty is being refies. It doesn't refine that these places are places of culture, but it refies the framing of that framing, refies that the Western Europe is the place of human rights, right? So let me repeat this again. The framing of non-Western nations as places of cruelty, as places where human rights are constantly violated, refies the West as the place of human rights. This is what is being reified here, right? And there's this division between Western and non-Western value, which is underneath, and there is different layers to this different type of divisions, right? Now, start thinking about how really this is simply an artificial construction, right? It's not that there is some truth to it. There is truth in a lot of things, and many things can be true at the same time. But the way this is framed, this reification, it is an artificial construction, because the fact that now at this moment in history, Europe or the West is a place where human rights are more respected than in other non-Western nations, doesn't mean that Europe is by any means necessary that is the place of human rights. And in fact, these human rights in Europe can be reversed very quickly because they're contingent. They don't come about through values that are anchored in Europe or in the West, because these values are constructions in and of themselves. In that sense, they're contingent and they can be reversed. And in fact, you look at the whole fear around right-wing and democratic here is the key. Populism, the whole fear around that is precisely because those values are part of the West, the West and the culture in the West, and they're not so deeply established that they cannot be taken back. And if you look, Hungary is an example, but and then we're going to be looking at Giorgia Meloni, who is about, like, all the polls indicate that she might become part of the Italian government this weekend, Giorgia Meloni, and you're going to see how her rhetoric is straight out of Italian fascism. Again, that is indicating that these reified values are in fact a construction. And for us analysts, our job is to deconstruct the change on it, but the conceptual change that goes from framing, reframing, reification, and cultural recoding or coding if it's a new issue, right? That is your job, not to agree or disagree with something. And that is what you need to be doing in your media assignment. And so I'm going to show you how Meloni, again, in a Vox meeting of the far-right party in Spain, is reframing much of these Western values in a way that is quite astounding. Yeah. So just let me play just the video and then I'll explain a little bit more about it.
Y los monstruos no somos nosotros, sino quienes en nombre de una supuesta libertad ofrecen prácticas abominables como el útero en alquiler o drogas gratuitas. Ellos son los monstruos. La familia está siendo atacada, cuyo núcleo es esencial para la procreación, la educación, la formación de nuestros hijos, el elemento central de los afectos y de la solidaridad entre generaciones, el primer lugar de apartenencia. Se está atacando a la identidad sexual, que los grupos de presión LGBT desean abatir con la propaganda de género en las escuelas, en los medios de comunicación, en las instituciones, con el principio del self-ID. Yo no soy lo que soy, soy que siento, soy lo que siento, que afecta principalmente a los derechos y a los logros de las mujeres. Nuestra espiritualidad, el sentido de las raíces sagradas y cristianas están siendo atacadas en nombre de un relativismo absoluto y de un ateísmo agresivo que en última instancia allanan el camino para el proselitismo fundamentalista.
So the fundamentalists are all these sort of secular, European, globalized forces that are very big. There's this they. It's reconstructed. And it's not only outside of Europe, it's already inside of Europe. And the frame is they are attacking us meaning we that we have been here in Europe forever, we Christians, that the again, Christian values are something that is autochthonous, that belongs to the West, right? So it's reconstructing the frame they and us, right? And the reframing, the successful reframing, so they are attacking us, the reframing is the eventual reframing is they're not really we, right? Because they're fundamentalists, they're others, and these others are not only immigrants, for instance. These others are leftists, they're LGBTQ advocates, activists, right? These are the fundamentalists. And I wanted to think really beyond this idea of the crazy talk framing that is usually manufactured in most of media analysis around the far right. Because again, the change, when we start thinking about the change between the framing, reframing, reification, and the eventual recodification of cultural codes, we need to think about to what extent what Meloni is saying here is our, in this general way, so in this kind of thinking in this universal way, let's say in this case in the West, is part of the culture of the West, right? How is it that Meloni is inserting a discourse that already has an opening within, in this case, European culture, right? And once we understand that, right, you can combat, right? You can fight against the reification, right? Once you know what is it that allows them, what is that allows them for that change of framing, reframing, reification, and cultural recodification, what is it exactly? Then you can combat if you want to do so as an activist, for instance, you can combat that. But you need to, you meaning universal you, need to, there is a need to go beyond the crazy talk. And you as analysts have to go beyond the crazy talk. You don't have to combat anything, but you have to go in your analysis beyond the, oh, this is just simply crazy talk. Right? And I'm going to show you an example in just 1 second. Yeah. So I'm going to use film real quick to show you how can we go beyond the mainstream media of framing, right? And I'm going to use the example of a fantastic book by Sebastián Leiro, and focus around transgender rights in Chile. And I want you, and really the plot is Marina, who is a transgender woman, after the sudden death of her partner, need to battle different levels of transphobia within the partner's family, within the institution. But the point of this film and the way transphobia is framed in here is done in a way that escapes the usual discourse around transphobia, which has to do with the dangers, the physical dangers of transphobia, how really transphobia kills. And here in this film, what this film allows to frame transgender people and transphobia as two things are completely opposed, in which one of them, in this case, a transgender person, is completely, it's fully formed, it's psychologically layered, it's deep, it's sophisticated, versus transphobia is completely flat. It doesn't have any sophistication. It's unidimensional, and it's normative. So the non-normative has depth. The normative is completely shallow, right? So because in the end, at the end of the movie, it's not that it's a celebration, for instance. There's no positive spin on the transphobia that Marina faces, but Marina is not just defined by transphobia or her transgender identity, right? She's defined ultimately in the movie by the love and by the loss of love in a very particular way. In that particular way is in the way a transgender person deals with love in a transphobic society, right? So I'm going to show you a clip of that so you notice the subtleties of the framing of transgender and transphobia.
Nombre completo.
Marina.
¿Su cédula de identidad la tiene?
Ese asunto está en trámite, señor.
Mientras no lo cambie, este es su nombre legal.
Mi nombre es Marina Vidal. ¿Tiene algún problema con eso?
¿Por qué sale arrancando?
¿Por qué me tiene retenida?
Usted no está retenido.
Entonces, ¿por qué tiene mi carnet?
Buenas. ¿Marina? Gracias por tu lamento que te haya tocado todo esto. Yo soy Gabo.
Hola, Gabo.
¿Qué tal? Hola. ¿Qué tal? Gabrielo Nieto, soy hermano de la persona que falleció. ¿Pasa algo? ¿Está todo bien?
No, no pasa nada.
Lo vino a dejar y se fue rápido, pero nosotros necesitábamos hablar con él.
Bueno, puede hablar conmigo. Yo soy de la familia, me voy a hacer cargo. Usted entiende que la señorita estaba con mi hermano cuando murió y eso puede ser delicado, ¿no?
See, so in this case, Marina, a full-rounded character, is not only dealing with the transphobia of the policeman calling her a he by his name instead of by her name, but she's also dealing with sexism, for instance, how a man actually have to come in, step in, and deal with all these issues. And this is a trend in the whole. You actually watched I invite you to watch the entire film. It's a whole issue of the film. There's different layers that Marina has to deal with beyond transphobia, and all this. And whenever there is transphobia, which plays a huge role in the movie. Transphobia is this other unidimensional, shallow, unsophisticated character, like this policeman. That's a really good example. Okay, so we're going to go into class discussion right now. This is what I want you to do. I'm going to show you a clip from the Singapore's Prime Minister. And in this clip, I want you to, while you're watching the clip, take notes and think about these 4 different questions. Yeah. And I might have to go into YouTube. All right, so anyways, I'll then, because it's not working now, I'll stop the recording and then I'll show you right away.